As with all witnesses, the full statement will be made part of the record. Dr. Holtz-Eakin is the president of the American Action Forum. He was formerly the director of the Congressional Budget Office under George W. Bush from 2003 to 2005. I believe that's when we first met, was back at that time.
That's correct, Chairman.
It's good to have you here. Please go ahead, sir.
Well, thank you, Chairman Leahy and Ranking Member Grassley, members of the committee. It's a privilege to be here today. I have submitted a written statement for the record. Let me briefly make 3 points, and then I look forward to answering your questions. The first point is simply that the immigration reform bill before you has many aspects. There are important security considerations. There are sectoral economic impacts. There are legal issues which have to be resolved. But at its core, immigration reform represents an economic policy opportunity. It is an opportunity for the United States to dictate the evolution of its future population, and as I emphasize in my testimony, in the absence of immigration, low fertility rates mean that the U.S. population declines, and that the future growth of the U.S. is dictated by immigration choices. It will dictate the labor force participation and the effort exerted in our economy. It will have strong influences on the entrepreneurship and small business creation. The evidence is that new immigrants to the United States both work more, their labor force participation rates are higher, and have small businesses at a higher rate. As a result, it will increase the productivity growth in the U.S. economy, the fundamental building block of higher standards of living, and generate larger economic growth numbers than we have seen in recent years. I've done some estimates that for benchmark reform suggest you could have as much as nearly a full percentage point faster growth over 10 years. And associated with that would be something that I think every member of this committee would be quite pleased to see, and that is less budgetary pressure. Faster growth reduces, using CBO rules of thumb, deficits by about $2.5 trillion over 10 years. And that's clearly a benefit that we ought to think about when we think about immigration reform and not rely on those efforts which ignore economic growth. And I think that the U.S. is out of step with its economic competitors in that it does not use immigration policy as a tool of economic policy. Under 10% of immigration into the U.S. is for economic purposes. This bill makes important changes to the visa system, basing them more on economic considerations, and represents a step toward using a policy mix that is closer to other industrialized countries. A legitimate concern in all of this is what will happen to the federal budget. It's a concern that I have been close to for a long, long time. And I think a good way to think about the budgetary implications is to start with the last piece of comprehensive immigration reform legislation the Congress looked at in 2007. The CBO did have the opportunity at that time to put out a score. That score indicated that if you looked at the balance between spending and revenues, it would, over 10 years, increase deficits by about $18 billion. And $18 billion doesn't sound like a lot now in the context of trillion-dollar deficits year after year, but I think that there are two things to remember about that $18 billion. Since that time, many of the things that were policy objectives, border security, an E-Verify system, and other pieces of the immigration infrastructure, there has been spending on that. About half of what the CBO expected would be needed has happened. So those comparable policy objectives now may be cheaper and generate less in the way of spending. The second thing that's happened has been that CBO did not use dynamic scoring. It did not take into account the potential economic growth effects, and that would change the impacts entirely. The last piece of what's happened, and something I'm sure we'll have a chance to talk about, is since that score, the Congress has passed in the President's Affordable Care Act, a large new entitlement program in the United States. And my reading of this legislation is there's a bipartisan commitment that those who would become registered provisional immigrants, those who are here illegally and enter the RPI program, would not be eligible for benefits, certainly not for 10 years, probably realistically not for 15, and so there will not be a budgetary impact over that horizon. Over the longer term, I think there's something that the Congress should keep an eye on in terms of the budgetary outlook, and I'd be happy to discuss with you the impact of this bill in that regard. But as I said before, I think the primary objective should be to make sure that when the many policy objectives are put on the table, economics does not get lost in the shuffle. This is a central tool of economic policy. This is an opportunity for us to improve on our growth record, which has not been good. and I look forward for the chance to answer the questions that you might have about that. Thank you.